the Gauntlet Podcast. My name is Rich.
I'm Lowell.
I'm Rich.
And here we are, back from Gen Con. I know you're expecting a Gen Con wrap-up episode where we talk about all the people we went out and drank with, and like all the people we hobnobbed with, and the funny stories.
Okay, talk about my Visa bill.
You could talk about Rach's Visa bill. I think we should not talk about those things, though. I think we're just going to talk about games. Is that okay? You guys good with that?
Given that I didn't go, I am fine with that.
We talk about games on this podcast?
Let me slide in
the
intro here. The Any award-winning Lowell.
You magnificent bastard.
We got to see it. It's real.
Is legit. I've held your medal, and by that I mean literally held your medal. That is not in some kind of double entendre. Medals were held by me, and it said Any on it. It was gorgeous. Yeah. It was a nice hefty weight.
It's hefty.
In fact, when I took it to UPS to mail it to you, Lowell, the guy looked at you and goes, "Damn, this is pretty nice." Yeah.
Oh, the design of them this year is so pretty. I'm so jealous of the people who won.
Yeah, it's nice.
Indeed. All right, I'm going to kick it off by talking about a game I didn't play at Gen Con. I know, it's crazy. But as I was looking at the games I've played, Legend of the Elements, A Taste for Murder, which I got to try for the first time at Gen Con, which my wife is super excited about because she's watched like 10 seasons of Midsummer Murders. Masks, of course, Spirit of 77, Tokyo Brain Pop, Dungeon World, Velvet Glove, Putin, The Veil, finished up my 1%er series, but the game I'm going to talk about is called Scavengers. So I picked up Scavengers at Origins. It was at the IGDM booth, and I also saw it at Gen Con. The thing is $15, which is, like, blows my mind, because I'm going to now do terrible audio, but just so you two guys can see that this game is gorgeous. Now, Lowell, I've run it for you, so you've already had me show you full color art all throughout. Some great, very unified style of art, cartoony, fun. So the deal behind Scavengers, it was a successful Kickstarter, which is the only way I think that this print run could possibly exist. Like, this is a game you definitely want to pick up at a convention. I don't think it will make it to stores at this price point. I'm just saying, like, this should be way more than $15.
Yeah.
But I got it, and you can't take it away from me. It's an 8.5 by 11 book. Vibrant, beautiful thing. In the game, it's a sci-fi, whimsical kind of sci-fi game. The player characters are a team of salvagers in a far future where there's constant interstellar war. And so the PCs are called Scavengers, and they live on this like anchor ship with some allies and some contacts and some nemesis and rivals and the like. So there's a little bit of cool roleplay that can happen there. But the main thing that happens is that there will be way out in limbo, there's a space battle that breaks out. And when it's done, your team is sent out on what's called a bungee ship. It's just shot straight out to the middle of the wreckage where the battle took place, and you're supposed to go in to pick what's a good place, like a nice ripe thing that you can go salvage some good stuff from, go into that ship, and then rescue possibly some passengers for a little bit of money along those lines, or try to grab the most expensive things that survive the space battle. So it is kind of a dungeon crawl, but with space around it and comedic. The art really sold me. This isn't necessarily a kind of game that I would normally play, but I was smart enough to run it for some people who did a great job of jumping in. And we jumped in feet first and made characters, and then I ran one of the modules in the back of the book, little like half pager, which is more than enough to kickstart the idea of at least a job. One of the things that worked for me about this is that every player character has a role on the team. Very defined, very niche, but it's kind of jokey because you have a thing that you do for your team. You'll be security or captain or tech expert and the like. You're supposed to do all the stuff that is oriented around that thing. And if you fail, another player character can say, "Here, let me do that." But then they charge you for it Because it's very money. There's a whole lot of money involved in this game because it's the whole reason you're a scavenger, right? You're there to make some money. So some of the decision point is around, well, if I fail this roll, I'm going to have to pay Cletus in order to open up this door. But if I don't do that, then we don't go any further and we don't get any of the good stuff, or we have to find another way around. It, to me, tonally, reminded me a little bit of Paranoia, which isn't a bad thing. It can be a nice...
I do want to say, to interrupt you on that, I mean, you mentioned what sounded like the sort of the security expert and the tech and stuff. But some of those roles, I was the efficiency consultant. So there are a number of these roles that are clearly made to be kind of comedic points. And
absolutely.
And in order to support them, we've got a lot of skills and stuff to go with that. So just that was an interesting thing to me.
When I was reading your description, it reminded me a lot of... I have a friend, and him and I used to joke about running Red Dwarf with Traveler and just having a bunch of belters and seeing what happened. And this game almost feels like that being actualized. It's the idea of it being a hard science fiction setting, but you're playing this small group of people who really have nowhere better to be.
If that's Red Dwarf, then yeah, it's on point. I haven't watched Red Dwarf, so I really couldn't speak to that, but it's very light in tone, but there are definite hard aspects to it. Like, your character could die. There are the possibilities. It's not a high threat level, but that does exist. There are reasons that people don't want to do this job. The tone in which we played it was much lighter. The gist was there was a mock-up of Steven Spielberg's name, but it's way in the future, and he's a super famous director who decided he wanted to tackle wartime documentaries. And so that was the challenge. They're going and they're discovering what's going on in the ship, because there were a bunch of people who were like posing for dramatic moments with the drone cameras. It was very silly, and they won the day by posing as pirates to kidnap the Steven Spielberg person, because that would bring him the best possible documentary of the real experience, and sold him on that, and that's how they won the day. So what I enjoyed about it is that the rules were simple, but they had a definite theme to it and carried through with the monetary. Now, there were a couple of things that aren't necessarily my bag. It is a little PvP in that you are trying to not only make a lot of money, but make the most kind of money and charge your buddies who are your team, not necessarily your friends, to do stuff. It's got the possibility of turning really dark, right? Because you're looking for passengers, and you can say, okay, this person's worth this much, this person's worth this much more, so we're going to pull you, and you get to stay here. That's something that you definitely want to have a tone conversation with your group before you tackle. You don't want that to sneak up on you, unless that's the way you roll, and you don't want to abandon your players, and you say, well, we're just going to play through it and see what happens.
You mentioned it's got PvP mechanics in there. Is there any kind of win mechanic, or are you meant to be cutthroat against each other throughout the story, and then the story ends where it ends?
Second one, cutthroat throughout the story. Story ends where it ends. Honestly, other than charging people to do stuff, the game pitches itself as being competitive more than PvP, so maybe that's a better phrase to use. But the competition is who's going to make the most money, right? Because then you can buy the cool equipment and have the most bragging rights. Lowell, what did you find about the game from a PvP perspective?
So it is interesting. I think Paranoia is a good comparison, because you get that sort of semi-cooperative nature. The group has to work together to solve the big problem, but people are looking out for themselves. Now, we didn't lean into that heavily. Some of the moves pay off on that, but it didn't feel PvP the way we did it, and so I don't think it's necessarily baked in. But at the same time, we didn't play it long enough. Like, if we had played it like a campaign, I wonder if not engaging with those mechanics would have made it a little, maybe not work quite as well. I'm not sure.
I could get that. This is definitely not a game I would want to play as a campaign. It's just very focused, and at its heart, it's a dungeon crawler, right? You go and you solve a couple puzzles, you make some die rolls, and you yuck it up a little bit, and you're done. That's not really the kind of game that draws me to the table. As a palate cleanser, it was great.
It's a palate cleanser, but it's got page after page of background. I mean, there's there's a metric shit ton of background and world setting and races and all this stuff that I don't know how that squares with the lightness of the other part of it, you know? When you went to read it, what was your thought on that, Rich?
I mostly skipped it. Like, I don't want to be, I don't want to be mean, but I was like, this is like 8 pages of backstory about their timeline of how they got here. I'm just going to accept they're here. And what do the characters do? Okay, they do this. Okay, skip to the end. Like, how do the conflicts? Oh, it works kind of like Coriolis. Okay, great. I got that. And skip to the end. Oh, we got some pre-baked modules. Awesome. That's all I need. So I probably read 20% of the book.
I think the dense setting would go great if you're using this game for a one-shot. It's from the description, it sounds like a great idea for a one-shot because you could go through the setting and be like, here's the one thing I want to latch onto and play around with, and we're doing this. And then you just sell it to your people who want to play.
Yeah, I could see that. I don't know if I would necessarily scoop out those copious amount of background, but kind of, I don't know. There's some stuff you could mine for material. It's not bad. It's just like what Lowell said. It's a lot for a very light game. 140 pages, 8.5 by 11. When this Coriolis mechanics can be explained in the space of a one sheet, like the cheat sheet that you made, Lowell.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a good excuse to deliver the art. Like, I was more inspired by looking at the art pieces than poring over the background. But that's just me. I'm a lazy reader, honestly.
Do you think it's a successful dungeon crawler?
I don't know if I'm the best judge of that because I run them so few times. Like, I ran Breakers earlier this year. I wouldn't necessarily call that super successful. I don't think it's puzzle and challenge styles of games are not my forte. I need to be able to talk in a funny voice and challenge relationships. And neither of those are what the crux that these games are built to hit. So I'm glad I got a chance to play it. I'm super happy that I bought it. It's beautiful on my shelf. It's probably not going to be my go-to game. It's probably not even my top 20. But I know that there are people who would love the hell out of this game. Because it's fun and it's red dwarfy, according to Rach. I'm taking Rach's word for it.
It's miners in space.
Yeah, there you go. It's paranoia. That style of game that has existed for decades as that kind of game that people like. This will fill that niche.
From the pitch alone, I know a bunch of people I could be like, hey guys, let's play Belters from Traveler, but it's going to be funny. And not funny just in character, Jen, where you'll die.
Right. There you go. Cool. Lowell, any other thoughts you had on Scavengers?
For $15 for the actual physical copy, yeah, it's worth it. I
regret not getting it.
Yeah.
And if you get it at a con, it's the bits and mortar, so I got the PDF as well. Super great deal. All right. Lowell, other than winning an Innie, I understand you've played some games too.
So over this last month, I did Blades in the Dark. Got a chance to do the Black Hack, Godbound, The Veil, Sprawl, Dungeon World, Action Cards, 13th Age, Defay, Atomic Robo with the Hellboy skin, Base Raiders, of course, Scavengers that you ran. Some of this is all because I made this month Fate Month for the Gauntlet, and I did 3 different Fate games. The most experimental...
Hey, all those tables made, though, right? Like, you filled all those tables of Fate, right?
Absolutely, and pretty quickly. So one of the things I did was, when I come up with these ideas for games, it's 2 months out. So I'll say, hey, I'm going to do this crazy thing. And then I give myself, 2 months to write it. So I came up with this idea called Reign of Crows. And essentially it's trying to do a Game of Thrones with Fate. And in a very particular way, with all of the players being from one family. And something has happened in the realm. The queen has died. And now all of them are working together to advance the family's interest. Everyone picks an archetype within the family, a different role like diplomat or spy or a wizard, that kind of thing. And we kind of do a structured game from that, with the idea being that the family comes first and then your interest comes second. You're still conniving, but there's a kind of a shared goal for everybody at the table there. So it was a really interesting experiment. So the first session we did your classic Fate world building, but in order to make it structured, I built a set of factions, like here are all the royal factions, here are the noble houses, here are the sort of the far-reaching, like the scholars and religious, and I did a matrix of 5 columns by 4 rows, and then I did a little bit of details on each of those. When we actually went to build the world and build the factions, I gave each player a row to define, so they each got to bite a little bit from the different slices, and that was really fun. It was a good, solid thing. It was a lot of work, but I love that kind of process. I think we probably played, 2.5 hours that first session. I would say an hour and a half, maybe more, was done on world building and character creation. Maybe closer to 2 hours of that. And I was very happy with how that worked.
You talked about your inspirations for this, Game of Thrones. Were all of the players who came in already conversant with at least the show, if not the books and the show?
No. I know some of them were, but like Sherry played and she doesn't know anything about that. That's not her bag at all. And I know David Lafreniere was, but I'm not sure about everybody else's familiarity with the show or how much they've watched that. And I haven't watched it, so I have no familiarity beyond, watching spoiler videos and things like that. So I wanted to make it kind of as simple as I could. So I used Fate Accelerated. I had 6 approaches that were sort of the personal approaches, and then kind of a second column of if they're working with these kinds of organizations, they had a set of approaches for that, and you combined the 2 to get your role. Try to keep it simple. Probably didn't look simple on the page, but I think it worked fine. I gave each archetype a particular resource. I stole that from Dresden Files Accelerated. They had kind of a mantle. They had a set of stunts that I'd made up for each of them that they could pick from, so they didn't have to go and look at everything. They just had like 12 things to pick from. It was essentially like a playbook. And that was good. People defined themselves using that what they chose. There were enough things to pick from that I didn't go crazy with it, but they could still make the character that they wanted and make it distinct in that. And let me kind of break down how I ran it. So I made it a seasonal game, and at the beginning of the season, I had this table of 300 random events. I generated some of those as sort of news facts. I threw those out at the beginning of the season. I had them talk with their head of house about what was going on. I introduced a threat that was happening, and then I said, okay, what do you guys want to do? And the way we worked is they talked, and then the players went off and did a seasonal action. Like going and manipulating somebody, or going and questing for something, or going and assassinating, or going and setting something up. And we did those as kind of hard frame scenes. We kind of play out just a little, and then we go to maybe 1, maybe 2 roles in that, and then we'd resolve and move on to somebody else. So that gave us that span over the 3 months of the season, and then at the end we brought it together with like a group event or a group meeting. And at least that's the structure we're going for. It's a little bit stolen from Blades in the Dark, but it was very, very highly structured.
It reminds me a lot of Houses of the Blooded in the way that you're describing, at least how we ran it.
Oh,
where
yeah.
You had your season actions, and that would inform what the event where everyone crossed paths in that season was. Yeah,
and I think you're absolutely right on the money, because a lot of the tech is as well taken from Blood and Honor, which is, of course, originally from Houses of the Blooded. I liked the way we did it. There weren't that many roles. The roles became important. Aspects were important. We were able to label things. Factions. Players would apply a label to a faction, and then that changed the fiction of what was going on. They would take aspects on themselves as costs that kind of changed their own fiction. Everything felt like we ended up getting 3 seasons, and it felt really organic how the story rolled out, even though there's that little mechanized bit where you're kind of doing that very structured go round. Like at one point when we kind of established that these players are relatives, and one of them was a father and son, and that created all kinds of interesting aspects. Overall, I think that worked. And there were some scenes that landed so well. I mean, just really, really well. Like, at one point, David's character had an aspect that people might find out about one of his secrets, and an NPC quietly confronted him. There was like a 5-minute NPC exchange where the guy kind of hinted that he knew something and kind of, said that he would be keeping an eye on David, and it was really good. And he was like, oh, this is a cool NPC. We're going to see him come back, going to see him come back next episode. The next scene, David arranged to have him murdered and like did it spectacularly and ended up turning one of the characters involving one of the other PCs in it. And it worked so well. I mean, it felt vivid and it felt like it was right to the genre. So there's a lot I loved about that. Now, the problem is there are a couple of things that this did is originally I had it that you did your scene and you did your seasonal action, and then we moved on to the next person. That ultimately was really unsatisfying. And so in the third session, we said, okay, if you do a scene, you have to bring somebody else in. You have to have somebody else come with you. Either we flash back to them helping you or they're actually with you. And that changed everything. It made everything much more interesting and invested and worked more strongly. We'd had that same problem when we played Legacy of how you handle those levels and when people are moving around in different places. I don't know whether my approach solves the problem. I don't think it does. I think there's still some problems with doing that structure and having those really broken up pieces. Maybe that it would work better face-to-face. Maybe that it would work better with a play-by-post approach. I don't know. I think there's a real challenge to doing those kinds of levels. And I don't know whether you're going to get the same kind of NPC interaction, character play that I like with this kind of interesting high-level stuff that I also adore. I know that we've got, I think it's Philip that's written a PBTA hack that's like this called Deep Dark Bloodlines. And we've seen several of these where people are trying to figure out how to get that blend between the two different levels. I'm not sure I solved the problem. There are two other issues that I had with the game. One is I had a lot of information. And so I've got a spreadsheet. Okay, so I've got one tab with the characters. I've got one tab with the factions. I've got one tab with the family. I've got one tab with the NPC list. I've got one tab with the stunts. Here's another tab with the events. Here's another tab with the names resource. All this stuff. And it was too much information. And that's just putting it in the most convenient way with tabs. So that may be a limitation of the game itself. I don't know. The online stuff didn't necessarily make it easier. The other thing is that one of the strengths of Fate is that when characters go to do something, they will succeed. That's it. If they want to succeed, if any of the players want to win and to complete the action that they've set out to do, they can. The question in Fate is, how much are you willing to pay to get to that? And I had that very much structured that there are a lot of different possible costs, like losing face or taking stress or, invoking aspects, all these things for costs. And then if you did better than your set difficulty, all these things that you could buy with your extra successes. And it's super cool, but it's also really mechanical. So we'd have this great scene, and then we would get to the roll to check it, and I put a lot of weight on it, so it wasn't like we were doing a lot of rolls, but we still had to stop and go, okay, let's look at what we have our choices, let's kind of put these things together, and I think it worked, but not completely. I mean, it's like 90% there, and if you aren't a Fate person, if you don't like that flow breakage, then it is not going to be for you. So that's sort of my thoughts about what we did and what I not quite sure about. Overall, I really dug it as an experiment. I'm really glad I had people come and try it. And I got some good feedback, and some people really liked it, and some people had problems on different things. So it was really cool, again, that Gauntlet allows us to try these kinds of things out.
Yeah, I think it is neat that you are evolving and kind of mixing and matching a few different things that you enjoy, and I think the overall gloss of Game of Thrones perfectly timed, right? You ended it right as Game of Thrones season ran. You can't run it now for another probably like year and a half.
Yeah.
So.
Make them wait.
Now, Rach, you had played Houses of the Blooded, and I don't know the actual structure of that. Are people doing a lot of things out separately and then coming together? How does that work?
So when we ran Houses, we played it so that you usually spent a session doing your season actions, which is when you lay out the map of your province and you look at all the different areas and you make rolls to see, am I going to harvest this item from this area? Like, am I going to grow wheat here? Am I going to go make wine over here? Am I going to make a piece of art? And then you roll on it and bid on how much is that piece of art worth? Are you going to complete that piece of art? And so that was part of the game. And we had in our group several players who despised that part of the game because it's so high level and so disconnected from the inter-character moments. And then we would look at the plot hooks that came out of those seasonal actions and say, oh, though there's going to be a piece of art revealed. So there's going to be a big gala. So what is everyone bringing? And then we would go into the character level, and because they're the different houses, basically.
Right.
What are the blooded of the snake doing at this party? And this guy's a blooded of a horse, and scandal. But we had, again, that disconnect. People struggled with it. And there were some interesting things that came out of it. I remember Kate's character, the most compelling thing she brought to that game is when she was young, she wrote an opera, and it was this incredibly scandalous opera about all of these political underworld things that were happening. And the biggest detail was nothing in it was a lie. It was all true. And, this 9-year-old girl had written this opera because men write operas. It's a big thing in that setting. And then that became part of the story going forward. But unfortunately, it stalled out just because you get to that seasonal action. And Houses also wants to play around with that idea of the family and the legacy aspect, where there's two ways your character can go out. They're going to be kept in a crystal, fossilized, and never, completely undying, or you die gloriously at a young age. We never made it that far because we always would hit that point of, oh, people are losing interest. Let's go play something else for a while.
Yeah, it's hard. I want it to work because I really love the idea of it. So I want to go back to it. I will say one piece of tech that I put in it that I adore is I literally made up a list of 300 just random events like, occult murders or, higher taxes or things like that. And then I would roll 4 of those at the start of the season. And then I would roll to see what group they were attached to and generate the story ideas out of that. And if the players investigated them, then they could deal with those. And if they didn't, then things would happen because they hadn't touched them. And it felt really good. Like when they got to the next season, they'd be like, oh, that was what's going on. Okay. Oh, I can't believe that's rolled forward. Oh, we didn't deal with the threat. And now the Mad Queen is, at the feet of the Black Rooted King. And oh God, what are we going to do now? We're all going to die. The videos, if people like actual play videos, we have all 4 sessions up on the Gauntlet playlist. They're really interesting. And I don't say that lightly. I usually don't say, oh yeah, you should go watch my video. If you like Fate or you like a Game of Thrones kind of style gameplay, you should watch this to see what we did and maybe what you can figure out to tweak it. If you played Birthright, if you played Houses of the Blooded, or any of those kinds of higher level games.
The list of events reminded me, did either of you see on G+, someone was passing around a random table of events taken from the writings of Gregory of Tours?
No.
Oh, nope. It's so horrific. There's a long story, but for an Urban Shadows game, I ended up reading a part of Gregory of Tours' writings of this particular King's Reign. It became important in our game. It's complicated. But then I saw the grid, and then it was like, horrific ways to die. I'm like, oh, I remember these.
Yeah.
But they're so interesting and strange because the history of France is bonkers.
There's a Twitter feed called Random Medieval Deaths that every day puts out a random medieval death taken from history, and they're all terrible.
Cool. Well, Lowell, is there anything else you wanted to say about Reign? And that's REIGN.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Now I dug it.
Reign of Crows.
I'm very happy with it.
Cool. Hey, Rach.
Yeah. What have I been up to?
Gen Con, and we did not get to play at Gen Con. I'm very sad about that.
You were busy with scheduled events, and I was hanging out with Rob and Kate, and we were just going to wander around the con and let the convention happen around us, I believe was our strategy.
That's a pretty cool strategy. Well, we did get to hang out. We just never slung dice together. But what games did you play? So, since the last time we recorded, include all of your awesome Gen Con stuff as well.
There's a few Gen Con things. I played Seið&n, when Games on Demand. I also played The Watch, both run by people in the Hamilton, Kitchener, Waterloo area of Southern Ontario, which I thought was interesting. They're all people I knew. Anna ran The Watch, and David from Hamilton and Hammer Games ran Seið&n. I played Love at the Time of Seith with Jason Morningstar. Outside of Gen Con, I crashed one of Rob's drop-in games of Fallen Empires for a session and did what I did as I play a Wolf's Head, so I just kind of go and steamroll everything and then leave the game again. We started playing Kate's Urban Shadows Moscow game, which is about being an unnatural in a police state. I also ran Warrior Poet, which is the haiku game by Grant Howitt. And 2 games of Legacy of the Slayer, one of which we played over the course of the Saturday at Gen Con, which was super neat. And the other one Kate and I have been playing is a sort of an emotional outlet as we ramp up the Fan Expo. But the game I want to discuss is Love in the Time of Seith by Jason Morningstar and I believe it's Matthias Holter, which we played through Games on Demand. It's a quick play hack of Archipelago 3. Have either of you played Archipelago before?
No.
I have briefly. I tried it play by post. It failed, because that's a game that should be played live.
It is a weird game.
It is a weird game. I'm sorry, I did play it at Camp Nerdly this year, run by Mark, and he did an amazing job running it. So yes, I have played Archipelago 3, but not Love in the Time of Seith.
Yes, Love in the Time of Seith is, as I said, it's a quick play version. It's meant to give you all the pieces that you would be building at the beginning of Archipelago and say, here's your locations, here's your characters, here's all your themes. Who is going to be setting up your themes and setting up your scenes is going to be based on who's sitting beside you, and go. I found it interesting because, so Saga of the Icelanders, take a step aside for a moment. Love at the Time of Seith is set in what's transparently kind of Iceland, sort of, if you squint, because there's Sif Conan is one of the characters that you can play. It's not properly Icelandic. The magic and the werewolves are kind of up to interpretation, and not.
You said and the werewolves?
Oh, there's werewolves.
Hot
Nice.
werewolves?
Well, you could interpret them as the character that's a werewolf is a young knight who's got the hots for one character, and another character has the hots for them, because this is a game about sex and blood, to be really frank. And then there's magic and violence and all those fun things.
Go on.
So they go back to Saga of the Icelanders. When my friends were running sagas in Toronto, we had lots of issues with people who would go, Icelanders, yeah, let's go play Vikings right now. And that's not what Sagas is. Sagas about community building and the evolution of those communities and gender roles over time. It's very nuanced. And Love in the Time of Seith is more everyone has daggers pointed at each other and things are going to explode in, about 20 minutes, if not sooner. And I found that duality interesting, because it kind of eschews the more mundanity that you see in sagas. As I said, it's a one-shot game that usually ends in violence. When Jason pitched it to us, he said, this is going to be a blood opera, and we were all down for that.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
I super dig games that tell complete stories in one sitting, because I run a lot of one-shot events, and you want to get a satisfactory story in. Maybe you can have a little bit of a yearning, be like, I kind of want to know what happens next, which was what happened to my character, because he kind of ended up holding the bag and didn't really have a clear way forward, but you could see, the next time this story would be told, he would come back with more things to fuck up everyone's day. To give you an idea of what these characters are. So the situation the game puts forth is you have the king who's ailing and elderly. He's in love with the Sikona, who's also teaching magic to the princess. And then the princess is meant to be wed to the Earl of the Kingdom to the East. The Earl was who I was playing. And then there's also a knight who's a werewolf. And you all have different hooks at each other. The game starts saying, this is probably the setting or the setup of how you feel towards the other characters. And here's the questions you want to answer. So my questions were, because I was all about treachery and poisons, it's like, how has handling poisons affected your daily life? And what happened to your ex-wife, by the way? Where did she go? And I don't remember what the other question was, but it was intense and loaded, and I loved it. I like Archipelago when it's firing properly. I love the card mechanic, so it's mostly freeform, except that anyone at the table can be like, oh, well, that might not be so easy, and then you pull a card, and all the cards are yes and no, but, no and, or yes, but. So, yes, you succeed, but here's this complication. Or, yes, you succeed, and here's this bonus you get off of because you did the risky thing. So, for example, in play, Rob was playing the princess and I was playing the earl, and we had to get married to unite our kingdoms, or that was what I was positioning. And Rob wanted to narrate, I have the earl at sword point in our duel for marriage, and he pulled a no but, and I think it was something like, something important is destroyed. And I'm like, I cut your sword hand off in the process of pinning you down. Just, yeah, we were playing a little recklessly.
Yeah.
He was actually aiming to get a yes card and say, I'm going to do the Raichi thing here, and I'm going to have you at sword point say, we're getting married, and it's going to be on my terms. But the cards were not in his favor. I find with Archipelago, so as I was saying, the people who sit beside you handle your themes and they handle your settings, or the setting that you're going to be playing in. And if you have a player who is a little bit weaker at story games or less experienced, that can kind of fall on its face, because you can get a weak setup, or you can get someone stuck with themes that they don't feel entirely comfortable with. So sex was one of our themes, and not every player is going to feel okay handling sex. The laws were another theme. Not everyone's going to be comfortable carrying that much weight to say, no, but the laws dictate this. And when I played Archipelago 3 a couple of years ago in the Toronto area gamers community, an open game, we found the tone got a little wishy-washy as well. Because we did the whole Archipelago 3, build everything from the ground up. So we had one character who was an escaped slave who was trying to run away from her captors and trying to sort of figure out who she was in the world. And then we had another character who lived in basically the Fallout version of Las Vegas, where Elvis was king. And that totally did not quite mesh together. And it frustrated some of the players at the table. There was one player in particular who was always like, one of the ritual phrases you can say is try another way, which is the button. It's kind of the X-Cardy button, but it's the X-Cardy, no, this tone isn't quite right. And he would just sit there and be like, try another way to anything people were putting at the table. So you really need a group of people who are agreeing on having the same tone and going for the same themes and concepts in play, and really wanting to push their boundaries, particularly with the love hack, because it's all about, well, this is a very loaded game in terms of talking about gender roles and the role of sex and the role of violence in this community. At one point, we had to step aside, and one of the players wanted to talk about, I feel like I'm being cast into the role where I'm the male aggressor who is going to be presenting violence to female characters, and I don't know if I'm okay with it. And we had to sort of step aside and talk about, okay, how do we make this a more fun game for you?
Sounds like a really good conversation to have. How did that come out? Were you able to reshape it around so that player was more comfortable?
Yeah, so one of the things that some of us have been talking about, because we play a lot of urban fantasy games, is it came up in the context of werewolves, because the werewolf is oftentimes in games presented as being a power holder, usually male, who is very ruthless in terms of how they rule their society or their community. You can see this in the wolf in Urban Shadows. You can definitely see it in the werewolf in Monster Hearts, where they're very physical and they're very violent. And this feeds into the mythos of the alpha wolf, the head of the pack. I mean, even when I was referencing Fallen Empires, it's the wolf's head is the chopper in Fallen Empires. But in reality, wolves tend to have more of a family structure, and there are rules, but it's not the alpha is in charge of everything and rules with an iron fist. So we had the knight, who was the werewolf, and the king, who gained the ability to become a werewolf, and the king came in assuming, I am the alpha, I am going to rule, and we had this pack of werewolves who had been formed by a pulled card at one point, and we decided, no, these werewolves are totally into the idea of we need to destroy human society and structure. We're going to become a wolf structure where everyone is equal and everyone gets a fair slice and everyone gets enough to survive. And that twisted the direction we were going in of the idea of the violent wolf to the werewolf who was not willing to let go of humanity because being a human king gave him so much power.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Have either of you played, because I think you mentioned Love in the Time of Seith, and then we've also got Saga of the Icelanders. Is Fate of the Norns at all in that same continuum? Have either of you seen or played that?
I wish Kate were on. That is one of Kate's jams, if I remember correctly.
Oh, okay.
Isn't she a real big fan of Fate of the Norns? I haven't played it. I actually haven't read it because it's super expensive.
I'm going to have to read it soon for reasons I'll talk about eventually. But it's my understanding of Fate of the Norns is it's a post-apocalyptic game because it's set during Ragnarok.
Oh, okay.
And then there's Vanguard, which is my friend Chris's game, which is about the beginning of the world, which is it's sort of Hono Bono, kind of inspired by Golden Sky stories a little bit, but also Nordic. Because you're the nature spirits who are going around documenting what the world is.
Interesting.
So they're not quite in that same wheelhouse, per se.
Cool. Okay. Gotcha. Oh, Rach, is there anything else you wanted to say about Love in the Time of Seith?
Highly recommend the game. Profits from the game go to the Mines Advisory Group, which is a charity that supports communities affected by landmines and unexploded ordnance. So go pick up the PDF if it sounds interesting, and the money goes to a good cause.
All right. Well, that is our games roundup. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we will talk about what's giving us life. Gauntlet Con is coming October 20th through 22nd. Registration for patrons is just around the corner, and let me whet your appetite. I'm just going to talk about games here. As you'd expect, there's more powered by the Apocalypse RPGs than you can shake a stick at, with Dungeon World, Sagas of the Icelanders, Apocalypse World, Fallen Empires, Legend of the Elements, Space Worm vs. Moonicorn, Murderous Ghosts, Blades in the Dark, and yes, that's kind of PBTA, Worldwide Wrestling, City of Mist, and Urban Shadows. We've also got Dungeon Crawl Classics, The Black Hack, The Rad Hack, Kalmata Live, a BX game, World of Dungeons, Earth Dawn, and Godbound. Is that not good enough? How about some more? Fate Accelerated, Swords Without Master, Heroes of the Hearth, Tenra Bansho Zero, Golden Sky Stories, Rocker Boys, and Vending Machines. Oh, you'd rather play in some games run by their designers. Oh, how about Monster Hearts and Dream Askew by Avery Alder, Sig by Jason Pitt, Pugmire by Eddie Webb, Alas for the Awful Sea by Haley Gordon, Happiest Apocalypse on Earth by Christopher Gray, Threadbare by Stephanie Bryant, The Veil Cascade by Fraser Simons, High Plains Samurai by Todd Crapper, Dust Fog and the Glowing Embers by Slade Stoller, or Melandros by Tom McGrenery. Oh, I see. You'd rather play some bleeding edge games that are still in development. How about Hydro Hackers from Phil Vecchione? Bite Me from Becky Annison, Paul Sega's latest joint, Traverser, Afterlife from Liz C, Sword's Edge, Face Explosion from Fraser Ronald, Awoke from Jonathan Lavallee, Poutine by Adam Robichaux, or Cartel from Mark Diaz-Truman. That's just a sample of some of the games. There are more being added. You need to be a patron to be able to get in early, so please sign up on our Gauntlet Patreon site so that you get the announcement when registration goes live. It's going to be awesome. It's Giving Me Life. I'll kick it off. What's giving me life? Gauntlet Con. Gauntlet Con coming up October 20th, 21st, 22nd. You probably heard the bump, but let me tell you a little more info that isn't on that little promo. Kate and I, mostly Kate, me just standing there going, is there anything I can do to help? Like, no, okay, can I help? Like, oh, you're okay, you got that. Awesome. Okay, well, you just let me know because she's on it. She knows the stuff, right? This is the thing she does, which is great. We have over 100 games, guys.
What?
I heard.
We were hoping for, like, I remember early meetings, we'd like to have a couple games every slot because we're starting in Friday afternoon, going all the way up to end of Sunday, and only taking off like the wee hours of the morning in Saturday morning, early Sunday morning kind of thing. So there are a lot of slots to fill, and there are slots with 5 or 6 games apiece in the really hot hours when volunteers really wanted to go. We have a lot of very exciting game designers, game masters, personalities who will be running games for us, including any award-winning blogger.
Almighty, stop it, Rich.
Lowell. So I'm stoked. I thought, well, I'm probably going to have to run like 6 games to make sure we fill all the slots. And now I'm sitting back like, is there any slot where I just make sure stuff doesn't break? I don't know. Maybe I don't need to run a game because what if people need help? Because, this is exciting and there's a lot going on. So very excited about Gauntlet Con. Proud of the Gauntlet community who are doing the lion's share of running games. So that is giving me life. Lowell, what is giving you life?
So right now, as you know, Gauntlet, the Gauntlet Hangouts, we plan a couple months out for the games. And right now we're getting ready to start playing for November. One of the things I'm going to do is I'm actually going to run fewer games in November. And from now until the end of November, I want to help anyone in the Gauntlet who has thought about GMing, who's wanted to run online, either for the Gauntlet or something else. If you need help, I want to help you with that. I've already done a one-on-one session. I've talked to some people. I've had them run games for me. Essentially, I want to spend the next 3 months doing kind of GM mentoring. I've already done it a little bit and I loved it. And I want to do more of it. And I want to get more GMs active either in the Gauntlet or online or both. That's what I want. And I'm super stoked about this project.
I think it's amazing what you're doing. And I know the people who you've already spoken with are very impressed and feel a lot more confident. I mean, running a game online, there are a few different tips and tricks and techniques, but
and Rich, you did a great 1 hour plus program that we have on the Gauntlet playlist that is dynamite introduction. Everyone I've talked to who've watched it has said it is amazing, and so that's a great resource out there already.
Thanks. Lowell, you were a big part of that. Look, we hug each other back and forth because he jumped in and gave no, Rich, you forgot this thing, so it's super great. Thank you, Lowell. Rach, what is giving you life?
I am midway through a multiple convention tour right now. I have never done so many conventions in such a small span of time, so it's interesting. Right now I'm pretending to work in pharmacy again in between my cons. We did Gen Con a couple weeks ago. This week coming up, or possibly past, depending on when this episode drops, is Fan Expo Canada, which is one of the biggest conventions in Canada, where I'm part of the team that organizes the open role-playing games and the D&D Adventures League tracks. After we record, I'm going to go downstairs and start reading through my epic and cutting apart little scripts, because apparently at one point they have to act out a play, and you get scripts with prompts like, look at my 50, or it was, look at my 10-foot pole, or there's blood, and blood. And I really just want to know what people are going to do with that. It's going to be a weird evening on the Saturday. And then the week after, we get in the car again, and we're going down to Buffalo for Queen City Conquest, which I'm super hyped to go hang out with some of my friends from Gnome Stew and Misdirected Mark. So it's going to be really fun.
Awesome. That sounds really great. I wish that Queen City Conquest was as close to me as it is to you, because
it's not that much fun to fly to Buffalo.
Well,
it is flying to Buffalo.
Yeah, flying to Buffalo. After Gen Con. Just not going to have it for me this year, but it does sound super fun. All right, well, that is going to bring to a close another Gauntlet episode. Keep in mind, folks, that Gauntlet Con is coming up in just a few weeks. The registration process will be happening. We have games that are being loaded onto our website by GMs as we speak. I'm doing the approval and checking through all the things and getting more and more excited. We'd love to game with you outside of Gauntlet Con. You can join our Google Plus community Gauntlet Hangouts and see all of the games we're posting up there. Feel free to join our regular The Gauntlet community on Google Plus. Our website is gauntlet-rpg.com. We do have a Twitter account at GauntletRPG, which we tweet 3 or 4 times a week, just like everybody else. That's how it goes, right, Rach? Like 3 or 4 tweets.
Depends on how many funny things are on the internet today.
There you go. We also have a sense of humor. Don't forget, if you'd like, you can join our Patreon, which is a really great deal because you can get access to our monthly zine, which is fantastic and gorgeous. I love the arts pieces that are coming out on the most recent ones are just stellar and jaw-dropping. And then you can also have the possibility of supporting us and getting first priority on games that we regularly get out. And with the hard work of Gauntlet Con, we're hoping that more people become confident and we can continue to grow out that schedule. And yeah, it's pretty exciting. So please come join us. And of course, 5-star reviews for the podcast would be super helpful for people to find out about the show. Reviews are helpful. And last but not least, thank you, Rach. Thank you so much for coming on, talking about your experiences. What are some other ways that people can find you, track you down, or listen to you?
I am part of It's Like D&D, which is currently sort of on hiatus until we can clear out of our convention season. So after Fan Expo, new episodes going up. I occasionally write over at Thakos at midnight. You can also find me on Twitter, tweeting weird things at TEDDOG, TEDDOG.
Awesome. And Lowell, any award winner, blogger, Lowell, how can people find and follow your amazing blog?
Well, they can go to my any award-winning blog at Age of Ravens. Or I'm also on G+, or you can also follow me on Twitter at EDIGE23. That's my handle for most everything. So that's a great way to follow me and to get a chance to play with me online, which is what I want more of.
Indeed, indeed. Well, thank you all so much. And listeners, thank you for checking in. Until we talk to you again.